The sea was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that didn't belong in war. Waves rolled gently beneath the massive hull of the German battleship Bismarck as it cut through the Atlantic like a blade through glass. On deck, sailors stood at their posts, quiet, focused, uneasy. Because something wasn't right. It should have been over, one crewman muttered, gripping the railing. Another shook his head. We took too much damage, there's no way we're still afloat. And yet, they were. Deep inside the ship, Captain Ernst Lindemann stood in silence, staring at the damage reports scattered across the table. Flooded compartments. Destroyed systems. Critical failures. By all logic, they should have sunk. Report again, he said calmly. An officer hesitated. Sir, the damage hasn't progressed. Lindemann turned slightly. What do you mean hasn't progressed? It's stopped. Silence. That's not possible, another officer said. We've triple-checked, the first replied. The flooding, it's not spreading. Lindemann's eyes narrowed. And the repairs? No active repairs, sir. A pause. Then. So the ship is stabilizing, on its own? No one answered. Because no one could explain it. Above deck, the wind shifted. Subtle. But wrong. A low hum vibrated through the ship, not mechanical, not natural. Something else. One sailor looked down at the steel beneath his feet. Do you feel that? Another nodded slowly. It's like the ship's alive. A sudden shout broke the tension. Contact on the horizon. All eyes snapped forward. Through the fog. Shapes emerged. British warships. Closing in. Fast. Battle stations, came the order. The crew moved instantly, discipline overriding fear. Guns rotated. Engines roared. The Bismarck prepared for what should have been its final stand. Again. But this time, something was different. As the first shells fired, they hit. Direct. Explosions tore across the deck. Flames burst outward. Men were thrown to the ground. But the ship didn't break. Didn't falter. Didn't even slow. What the hell, one gunner whispered. More shells came. More impacts. More destruction. But every time, the damage stopped. Like something refused to let it spread. Inside the command room, an officer stumbled back from the reports. Sir, we're taking hits, but what? We're not losing structure. Lindemann stared at him. That's impossible. I know, sir, but it's like. The ship is holding itself together. Silence. Heavy. Then. Lindemann stepped forward. Return fire. The Bismarck answered. Its guns roared louder than the storm. Shells tore through the fog, accurate, devastating. One British ship took a direct hit. Then another. Chaos erupted across the sea. Target hit. They're pulling back. But Lindemann didn't celebrate. He was watching. Feeling. This isn't normal. Below his feet. The ship hummed again. Stronger. Responding. Listening. Above deck, a young sailor gripped his weapon tightly. It's helping us. Another turned sharply. What? The ship, he said, voice shaking. It's helping us win. A massive explosion rocked the horizon as another enemy vessel burned. The crew stared. Not in triumph. In confusion. In fear. Because deep down, they all felt it. This wasn't luck. This wasn't engineering. This was something else. Something alive. Something aware. Back in the command room, Lindemann placed a hand on the table. What are you? The question wasn't for his crew. It was for the ship itself. And for a moment, nothing answered. Then, the hum changed. Lower. Deeper. Almost like a heartbeat. Lindemann froze. No. Across the ship, men stopped mid-motion. They felt it too. The steel beneath them was responding. Adapting. Becoming stronger with every hit. Sir, an officer whispered, we're not just surviving. Lindemann finished the sentence quietly. We're evolving. Silence fell over the room. Outside, the enemy fleet began to retreat. Not tactically. Not strategically. But desperately. Sir, they're falling back. Orders? Lindemann didn't respond immediately. He looked down. At the ship. At the steel. At the impossible. Hold fire. The crew froze. So. They're retreating. There's no need to pursue. But we can destroy them. Lindemann's voice hardened. No. Silence. Then. Yes, sir. The guns went quiet. The sea returned to calm. But it wasn't peaceful anymore. Not after this. Lindemann stepped outside onto the deck. The wind brushed against him. The ocean stretched endlessly. And beneath him, the Bismarck moved. Not just forward, but with intent. You shouldn't exist, he said quietly. The hum answered. Soft, but undeniable. Behind him, a sailor spoke hesitantly. Sir, what do we do now? Lindemann didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the horizon. We survive. A pause. And we learn. The sailor swallowed. Learn what, sir? Lindemann's voice dropped slightly. Whether we're still in control of this ship. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Because deep down, every man on board already knew the truth. They weren't alone out here anymore. Not on the ocean. Not on this ship. The Bismarck cut through the waves. Stronger. Faster. Alive. And somewhere far beneath the surface, something ancient had awakened. The ocean was no longer calm. It hadn't been since that moment. The moment the crew realized. The Bismarck wasn't just surviving. It was changing. Night fell slowly over the Atlantic, but the darkness didn't bring peace. It made everything worse. The waves grew heavier, slamming against the hull with unnatural force, yet the ship cut through them effortlessly. Too effortlessly. Below deck, machinery that should have been failing was running smoother than ever. An engineer stared at the gauges, his hands trembling. This doesn't make sense. Another crewman leaned in. What is it? The engines, he whispered. They're running above capacity, but there's no strain. That's impossible. I know. A pause. It's like something is helping them. Silence. They both looked down at the metal floor beneath their feet. And for a moment, it felt like it was watching them back. Above deck, Captain Lindemann stood alone. The wind howled now, carrying something colder than the sea. Not weather. Not fear. Something deeper. Report, he said without turning. An officer stepped forward. No enemy contact, sir. The fleet has completely withdrawn. And our condition? A hesitation. Better than expected. Lindemann's eyes narrowed slightly. Defined better. The officer swallowed. Sir, some of the damage is gone. Silence. Gone. Yes, sir. That's not how ships work. No, sir, it isn't. Lindemann finally turned. Show me. Moments later, they stood at a section of the hull that had been torn open hours before. Now, it was sealed. Not repaired. Not patched. Sealed. Smooth. Like it had never been damaged. The officer spoke quietly. "We didn't do this." Lindemann stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. He reached out and placed his hand against the metal. Cold. But steady. Solid. Alive. He pulled his hand back slightly. "This ship." A pause. "Is adapting." The officer didn't respond. Because there was nothing to say. They both knew. This had gone beyond war. Beyond engineering. Beyond reality. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed across the sky. Both men looked up. Lightning split the clouds, but it didn't disappear. It lingered. Frozen in place. "Sir," the officer whispered. Lindemann didn't answer. Because something was rising from the water. Not a creature. Not a ship. Something vast. The ocean itself seemed to bend around it. The waves pulled inward, spiraling slightly toward a single point ahead of them. And then, the Bismarck slowed. On its own. "I didn't give that order," Lindemann said. No one did. The engines weren't failing. They were stopping. Choosing to stop. The ship came to a complete halt. In the middle of the Atlantic. The crew froze. Every man on board felt it. That same hum. But louder now. Stronger. Calling. "It's not us," a sailor whispered. "It's calling the ship." The water ahead began to glow faintly. Dark blue. Deep. Endless. Something ancient moved beneath the surface. Lindemann stepped forward slowly. "What are you?" The ocean answered. Not with a voice. But with pressure. A force that pressed against the ship, against reality itself. The Bismarck responded. The hum shifted. Matched it. Aligned with it. The officer's eyes widened. "Sir, it's communicating." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Lindemann's voice dropped. "No." A pause. "It's recognizing us." The glow intensified. The sea parted slightly. And for just a moment, they saw it. Something massive. Older than war. Older than steel. Watching. Waiting. Judging. And then, it vanished. The ocean snapped back into place. The glow disappeared. The storm calmed. But the Bismarck didn't move. Not immediately. Like it was thinking. Then, the engines roared back to life. Stronger than before. The ship surged forward. Faster. More powerful. More aware. The officer staggered slightly. What just happened? Lindemann didn't answer right away. He was staring ahead. At the empty horizon. "We've been acknowledged." The officer's voice shook. "By what?" Lindemann's eyes didn't move. Something that shouldn't exist. A long silence followed. Then, "Orders, sir." Lindemann took a slow breath. And for the first time, there was something different in his voice. Not fear. Not confusion. But realization. "We continue." Continue, where? The Bismarck cut through the waves again. Faster than any ship should. Unstoppable. Unexplainable. Alive. Lindemann's voice dropped slightly. Forward. A pause. Because whatever this is. He looked down at the deck beneath his feet. It chose us. And far below. In the darkest part of the ocean, something began to follow. Not chasing. Not hunting. Just watching. The Bismarck didn't slow. It couldn't. Not anymore. The ocean roared around it, waves crashing violently against its hull, but instead of resisting, the ship cut through them like they weren't even there. Like the sea was letting it pass. No. That wasn't right. The sea was moving with it. Below deck, alarms that once screamed danger now stayed silent. Too silent. An engineer wiped sweat from his forehead, staring at the control panel. We're not controlling this anymore. Another crewman shook his head. Of course we are. We're still steering. No, the engineer said, voice low. We're holding on to control. A pause. There's a difference. Above deck, sailors struggled to stay steady as the ship accelerated. Speed's increasing. But we didn't push the engines. Then what's doing it? No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. Captain Lindemann stood firm, gripping the railing as wind tore past him. The sky above had changed. Clouds twisted unnaturally, spiraling slowly toward the direction the ship was heading. We're being guided, he said quietly. An officer beside him turned sharply. So? Lindemann didn't look away. It's not random. This course, he narrowed his eyes, is intentional. The officer swallowed. By who? Lindemann's voice dropped. Not who. A pause. What? The Bismarck surged forward again. Faster. The waves no longer resisted, they parted. Like something beneath them was clearing the way. And then, the compass spun. Violently. Out of control. Sir. Navigation is failing. No, Lindemann said calmly. It's being overridden. The officer froze. Overridden. Before he could say more, every light on the ship flickered. Then, went dark. Complete darkness swallowed the deck. No stars. No horizon. Nothing. What just happened? Someone whispered. The answer came not in sight, but in feeling. That same presence. Stronger now. Closer. Watching. The hum returned. But it wasn't just the ship anymore. It was everywhere. In the air. In the water. Inside their chests. A sailor dropped to his knees. I can feel it. Another backed away slowly. It's inside the ship. No. The first sailor looked up, eyes wide. It's inside everything. Silence. Then, a voice. Not spoken. Not heard. Felt. Vessel. Every man on board froze. Lindemann's grip tightened. You hear that too? The officer nodded slowly, pale. Yes, sir. The voice continued. Endurance, confirmed. The ship trembled. Not from damage. From response. Adaptation, accepted. Below deck, metal shifted. Not breaking. Not bending. Changing. Reinforcing. Strengthening. One engineer stumbled back. The hull, it's getting thicker. That's impossible. It's happening. The voice pulsed again. Evolution, initiated. Above deck, Lindemann's eyes widened slightly. No. For the first time. There was something close to fear. Not panic. But understanding. This isn't survival, he said quietly. This is transformation. The darkness lifted. Instantly. The stars returned. The ocean stretched out again. But everything felt different. The ship felt heavier. Stronger. More solid. Like it had become something else entirely. A sailor ran his hand along the railing. This isn't the same steel. Another whispered. It's better. The engines roared again. Louder than ever before. The Bismarck surged forward. Faster than any warship in history. Cutting through the ocean like it owned it. Lindemann stood still, staring ahead. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. No answer. But the ship responded. Turning slightly. Adjusting course. On its own. The officer looked at him. Sir, we're changing direction again. Lindemann nodded slowly. I know. Do we stop it? Silence. A long one. Then. No. The officer hesitated. So. Lindemann's voice hardened slightly. We follow it. A pause. Because if we don't. He glanced down at the deck. I don't think we can stop it anyway. Silence fell again. But this time. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance. The Bismarck moved through the Atlantic. No longer just a ship. No longer just a weapon. Something else. Something chosen. And far behind them. The ocean began to change. Ships that followed their path. Vanished. Not destroyed. Not sunk. Gone. Like they were never there. The sea closed over them. Silent. Unforgiving. Watching. Waiting. And ahead. The horizon darkened. Not with storm. Not with night. But with something massive. Something impossible. Something that had been waiting. Long before war. Lindemann's eyes locked onto it. There. The officer stepped beside him. What is that? Lindemann didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't have a name for it. No one did. I don't think we're supposed to know. The Bismarck didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. It went straight toward it. Like it belonged there. Like it was being called home. And deep beneath the waves. That ancient presence stirred again. Stronger. Closer. Awake. The horizon didn't move. That was the first thing Lindemann noticed. No matter how fast the Bismarck surged forward. That dark mass ahead stayed exactly where it was. Unchanging. Unreachable. We're not getting closer, the officer said quietly. Lindemann didn't answer. Because he saw it too. The engines were at full power. The sea was parting. The ship was moving faster than anything should. And yet, that thing remained distant. Like it wasn't part of their world. It's not in the ocean, Lindemann said slowly. The officer turned. So. A pause. It's deeper than that. Below deck, the metal groaned, not from stress, but from growth. Plates shifted. Reinforced. Led. An engineer stumbled back, eyes wide. It's still changing. How much more can it change? The answer came immediately. As the walls thickened again. As much as it needs to. Above deck. The sky split. Not with lightning. Not with sound. But with something far more unnatural. A line. A tear. Straight across the horizon. And the dark mass. Moved. Not closer. Not farther. But clearer. The crew froze. That's not a storm, someone whispered. It's too still. No wind. No waves. Lindemann stepped forward slowly. It's waiting. The ship responded. The hum deepened. Matching something beyond it. The voice returned. Stronger now. Clearer. Vessel, approach. The Bismarck surged again. The ocean beneath it began to drop. Not violently. Not suddenly. But steadily. Like they were descending. "Sir," the officer whispered. The water level. It was lowering. The sea itself was pulling away, revealing something beneath. Something vast. Something ancient. The crew rushed to the railings. And then they saw it. A structure. Not built. Not natural. Something in between. Endless. Stretching further than the eye could follow. Black. Smooth. Alive. My God, someone breathed. Lindemann didn't speak. He couldn't. Because for the first time, he understood. "This isn't the ocean," he said quietly. A pause. "It's a surface." Silence. Heavy. Unbearable. The Bismarck slowed. On its own. Coming to a stop above the structure. The hum became a pulse. The ship was sinking. The voice returned. "Integration, possible." The crew froze. "Integration," the officer repeated. The metal beneath their feet shifted again. But this time, it wasn't strengthening. It was opening. Lines appeared across the deck. Cracks. But not damage. Patterns. Intentional. "Sir," the officer whispered. "The ship?" The Bismarck responded. Panel separated. Steel moved like muscle. Reforming. Adapting. Accepting. "No," Lindemann said immediately. For the first time, authority returned to his voice. "Hold position." The ship didn't listen. The hum deepened. The voice pulsed again. "Purpose, beyond war." The structure beneath them began to glow. Faint. Then brighter. Responding to the ship. Calling to it. Evolution, required. The crew began to panic. "This isn't right. We have to leave. Turn the engines, now." But nothing responded. The controls were dead. Lindemann stepped forward, gripping the railing hard enough to hurt. "This is still my ship." The hum paused. Just for a moment. Like it heard him. Like it was considering. "We are not yours to take," Lindemann said. The voice returned. Colder. Stronger. "You were chosen." The ship shifted again. More aggressively. The deck tilted slightly. Like something was pulling it downward. "Sir," the officer said, voice breaking. "It's pulling us in." The structure beneath them began to open. Slowly. Massive sections splitting apart. Revealing something beneath. Something endless. Something that wasn't meant to be seen. Darkness. Not empty. Alive. Watching. Waiting. Hungry. The Bismarck moved. Not forward. Not backward. Down. "Enno," Lindemann shouted. The crew grabbed onto whatever they could. The ship tilted further. The ocean was gone now. Completely. Only the structure remained. And the abyss below. The voice pulsed again. "Become more." The ship responded. Not resisting. Accepting. Changing faster now. More violently. More completely. The Bismarck was no longer just a ship. "Sir," the officer whispered. "We're losing it." Lindemann's eyes burned with something new. Not fear. Not confusion. Defiance. No. A pause. "We're taking it back." The officer looked at him, stunned. "How?" Lindemann didn't look away from the abyss. By reminding it, he clenched his fist. What we are. The ship dropped further. Closer to the darkness. Closer to becoming something else. But for the first time, it hesitated. Just slightly. Because something inside it was resisting. Not the crew. Not the engines. Something deeper. Something human. And for the first time, the ancient presence reacted. Conflict detected. The Bismarck trembled. Caught between two forces. The abyss below. And something rising within. Lindemann took one step forward. Into the shifting deck. Into the impossible. You chose us, he said. A pause. But we decide what we become. Silence. Then, everything stopped. Right above the abyss. The ship hung there. Between evolution and control. Between something ancient and something human. And the choice had just begun. Nothing moved. Not the ship. Not the structure. Not even the air. The Bismarck hung over the abyss like a decision waiting to be made. Lindemann stood at the edge of the deck, staring into the darkness below. It wasn't empty. It was watching him back. You want us to become something else, he said quietly. The voice answered instantly. Yes. No hesitation. No emotion. Just truth. The deck shifted slightly beneath his feet, like the ship itself was reacting to the answer. The officer behind him spoke, barely able to keep his voice steady. Sir. We can't fight this. Lindemann didn't turn. We're not fighting it. A pause. We're choosing. The ship pulsed again. The hum split. Two frequencies now. One pulling downward. One holding steady. The crew felt it immediately. A divide. Some men dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Make it stop. Others stood frozen, unable to move. It's inside us. The voice returned. Human limitation, detected. The abyss below shifted. Something within it began to rise. Not physically. Conceptually. Pressure. Existence. Remove limitation, become complete. The Bismarck tilted again. Slowly. Pulled downward. The structure beneath opened wider. Inviting. Demanding. Lindemann's grip tightened. No. The word cut through everything. Sharp. Defiant. The pull stopped. Just for a second. The voice reacted. Resistance, illogical. Lindemann finally turned. Not toward the abyss. Not toward the sky. But toward his crew. Men terrified. Confused. Still holding on. Look at them, he said. The voice didn't respond. They're afraid. A pause. They're human. The ship trembled again. Stronger this time. The hum shifted, unstable now. Conflicted. The officer stepped forward. Sir. Lindemann's voice dropped. This ship was built for war. The metal around them responded. Subtle. Listening. But it was crewed by men. A pause. Not tools. The voice pulsed again. More aggressive. Purpose must evolve. Lindemann stepped closer to the edge. Then evolve with us. Silence. Deep. Unnatural. The abyss reacted. The darkness surged upward. Closer now. Reaching. Testing. The ship shook violently. Panels shifted again. Faster. More chaotic. Like it didn't know what to become. It's breaking, someone shouted. No, the engineer yelled back. It's choosing. The Bismarck split. Not apart, but within itself. Sections of the hull darkened. Changed. Alien. Other sections remained steel. Human. Two forms. One vessel. The voice surged. Division, unacceptable. Lindemann didn't hesitate. Then accept it. The words echoed. Not loudly, but powerfully. The ship responded. The human side held. The alien side pushed. The abyss below roared, not with sound, but with presence. Demanding completion. Demanding transformation. Sir, the officer shouted. It's going to tear itself apart. Lindemann shook his head. No. A pause. It's going to define itself. The ship jolted. Hard. The two halves clashed. Not physically, but in purpose. Control versus evolution. Command versus instinct. Human versus something ancient. The voice spoke again. But this time, different. You resist. Lindemann stepped forward. We choose. Silence. Then, for the first time, the presence hesitated. Choice, inefficient. Choice is what makes us human, Lindemann said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, the abyss stopped rising. The pull weakened. The alien sections of the ship slowed. The transformation paused. The voice returned. Quieter now. Less certain. Define, purpose. Lindemann didn't hesitate. We survive. A beat. We fight. Another. And we decide. The ship pulsed. The two halves aligned. Not merged. Not separated. Balanced. The alien steel adapted. But didn't consume. The human structure held. But didn't reject. The Bismarck changed. Not into something else, but into something new. Something between. The abyss below slowly began to close. The structure sealed itself. The ocean returned, rushing back over everything. The ship rose, breaking through the surface again. Water crashing around it. Sky above. Storm returning. Reality snapping back into place. The crew collapsed to the deck. Breathing. Alive. The ship steadied. No longer pulled. No longer controlled. But different. Lindemann stood still, water dripping from his coat. Report. The officer looked around. Shaken. We're still here. A pause. But the ship? He looked down at the deck. It's not the same. Lindemann nodded slightly. Good. Silence. Then, the engines roared again. Controlled. Responsive. The ship moved forward. This time by command. But faster. Stronger. Something new beneath the steel. The officer looked at him. What are we now, sir? Lindemann's eye stayed forward. On the endless ocean ahead. We're still the Bismarck. A pause. But now. His voice lowered slightly. The ocean knows it. Far below. In the darkness. Something watched. Not hostile. Not demanding. But aware. The Bismarck had not been taken. Not consumed. Not controlled. It had answered. And that was something new. The storm followed them. Not behind. Not ahead. Around them. The Bismarck moved through the Atlantic like it no longer belonged to the surface world. Waves rose, but never struck. Wind howled, but never pushed. Even the lightning seemed to bend, splitting around the ship instead of hitting it. On deck, the crew stood in silence. No one celebrated. No one spoke. Because every man felt it. The ship was still theirs. But it wasn't only theirs anymore. Speed holding steady, an officer reported quietly. Lindemann didn't turn. At what level? The officer hesitated. Higher than before, sir. A pause. And stable. Lindemann nodded once. Good. But his eyes didn't leave the horizon. Because something had changed out there. The ocean wasn't just water anymore. It was aware. Below deck, engineers monitored systems that no longer behaved like machines. Pressure readings don't make sense, one muttered. Then recalibrate them. I tried. They keep correcting themselves. Another leaned closer. The ship is doing it. Silence. It's adjusting, before we can. Above them, the hull shifted slightly, not violently, not dangerously, but intentionally. Adapting to the water. Matching it. Moving with it. We're not maintaining the ship anymore, the engineer whispered. It's maintaining us. Above deck, a lookout shouted suddenly. Contact! Starboard side. All heads turned. Through the storm. A silhouette. A warship. British. Closing in. They came back, the officer said under his breath. Lindemann finally turned. They don't know. Know what, sir? A pause. What we've become. The enemy ship opened fire. Shells tore through the storm. Direct hits. Explosions erupted across the Bismarck's deck. Flames burst outward. Men were thrown back. Smoke filled the air. And then, nothing spread. The fire died instantly. The damage stopped at the point of impact. Like before. But faster. Cleaner. Controlled. The crew stared. No way. Another shell hit. Same result. No loss. No collapse. No weakness. The officer looked at Lindemann. Orders? Lindemann watched the enemy ship through the smoke. Calm. Focused. Return fire. The Bismarck answered. Its guns roared, louder, sharper, more precise than ever before. The first shell struck the British ship. Direct hit. The second. Even more accurate. The third. Devastating. The enemy vessel faltered. They're breaking formation. Keep firing. But Lindemann raised his hand. Hold. The guns fell silent. The crew froze. So. We can finish them. Lindemann's voice didn't rise. We don't need to. The officer stared at him. They'll come back. Yes. Then why? Because, Lindemann said quietly. We're not proving anything anymore. Silence. The enemy ship turned. Retreating. Not tactically. Not strategically. But uncertain. Like something about the Bismarck had unsettled them. The storm calmed slightly. The waves lowered. The sea steadied. And for a moment, everything felt balanced. Lindemann stepped forward slowly. It's listening again. The officer stiffened. So. Lindemann looked down at the deck. The ocean. A pause. It's not testing us anymore. The ship hummed. Soft. Controlled. Aligned. Then what is it doing? The officer asked. Lindemann's voice dropped slightly. Watching. Silence. Then. The radio crackled. Suddenly. Violently. Every man on deck turned. "We have incoming transmission." "From who?" "I don't know, it's distorted." The signal cut in and out. Static. Fragments. Bismarck, respond. Impossible, confirmed sighting. Not the same. The officer grabbed the receiver. "This is the Bismarck. Identify yourself." Silence. Then. A voice. Clearer. Shaken. "What are you?" The crew froze. The officer looked at Lindemann. "Sir." Lindemann stepped closer. Took the receiver. "This is Captain Lindemann of the Bismarck." A pause. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then. "We've been tracking you." Lindemann's eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" "Multiple nations." A longer pause. "You were supposed to be sunk." The wind picked up slightly. The ship hummed. Listening. And yet, Lindemann replied calmly. "We are still here." Static crackled. Then. "No." A pause. "You're not." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. The officer's grip tightened. "What does that mean?" The voice returned. "Lower now. More controlled. Every ship that followed your path." A pause. Disappeared. The crew looked at each other. "Gone." "Vanished," the voice said. "Without distress calls. Without wreckage." Another pause. "Without explanation." Lindemann's gaze hardened slightly. "And you think that's us?" "No," the voice said immediately. "We think it's what's following you." Silence. The hum beneath their feet deepened. Stronger. Closer. The ocean shifted. Subtle. But real. The officer whispered. "Sir." Lindemann didn't look away from the horizon. "I know." The voice crackled again. "You're not just a warship anymore." A pause. "You're a signal." The wind died. Instantly. The sea stilled. Completely. And then. From beneath the surface. Something moved. Not rising. Not attacking. But circling. Watching. Waiting. Lindemann's voice dropped. "We're not being followed." The officer looked at him. "Then what is it?" Lindemann didn't answer immediately. Because now. He understood. "We're being studied." The ship hummed in agreement. The ocean responded. And far below. That ancient presence stirred again. Not hostile. Not curious. But interested. Because the Bismarck had done something no other vessel ever had. It chose. And now. Something else was about to. The ocean didn't move. Not a wave. Not a ripple. It was wrong. Every man on the Bismarck felt it at the same time, that deep, instinctive warning that something was about to happen. "Sir," the officer whispered, barely breathing. Lindemann didn't answer. Because he was watching the water. Watching the stillness. "It's not reacting to us anymore," he said quietly. A pause. "It's reacting to something else." The hum beneath the ship changed. Not aligned. Not balanced. Alert. Like something had entered the water that didn't belong. Then. The radio screamed. Static exploded through every speaker at once. Men grabbed their ears as the noise cut through the ship like a blade. "All units, do not approach." Repeat, do not. It's not just one. The signal cut out. Dead. Silence dropped instantly. Not just one, the officer repeated. Lindeman's eyes narrowed. There's more. The ocean answered. The still surface shattered. Not from above. From below. A massive surge rose from the depths, not crashing, but lifting. Like something underneath was pushing the entire sea upward. The Bismarck didn't rock. Didn't shift. It adjusted. Matching the movement perfectly. But the crew. They saw it. Far out across the horizon. Shapes. Not ships. Too large. Too smooth. Too wrong. What the hell are those? A sailor whispered. No one answered. Because no one had words for it. They moved beneath the water, but their outlines were visible. Massive. Endless. Like entire sections of the ocean were alive. The officer stepped back slightly. Sir, those aren't following us. Lindeman's voice dropped. No. A pause. They're gathering. The hum deepened again. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was defensive. The Bismarck shifted slightly. Turning. Positioning itself. Not to flee. To face them. It's preparing, the engineer shouted from below deck. Preparing for what? I don't think it knows yet. The shapes beneath the water moved closer. Slow. Deliberate. Calculating. And then, the voice returned. But not the same one. This one was different. Colder. Sharper. More divided. Anomaly detected. The crew froze. That's not the same voice, the officer whispered. Lindeman nodded slightly. No. The first presence responded. Familiar. Controlled. Adaptation, confirmed. The second voice pulsed again. Deviation, unacceptable. The ocean surged violently. For the first time. It wasn't calm around the Bismarck. The water rose in massive waves. Not random. Directed. Testing. The ship held. Adjusted. But the pressure was building. Sir, the officer said, panic creeping in. They're not observing us. A pause. They're judging us. The second voice intensified. Integration, incomplete. The first voice answered. Balance, achieved. Silence. Then. Conflict. The ocean erupted. Not with chaos. With force. The shapes beneath the water surged upward. Massive structures breaking the surface. Not creatures. Not machines. Something in between. Towering. Impossible. The crew staggered back. My God. The Bismarck didn't retreat. It moved forward. Against them. The hum roared now. Not quiet. Not subtle. Powerful. Defiant. Sir, the officer shouted. It's engaging. Lindeman's voice cut through the chaos. Hold your positions. We can't fight those things. We're not fighting them, Lindeman said. A pause. We're answering them. The ship surged forward. Straight toward the nearest structure. The ocean resisted. Waves crashed. Pressure mounted. But the Bismarck didn't stop. The first voice pulsed stronger. Choice, confirmed. The second voice responded. Colder than ever. Correction, required. The structure ahead shifted. Massive sections opening. Revealing something inside. Not weapons. Not energy. Something worse. Absence. Like space itself was missing. Sir, the officer whispered. That's not water? The Bismarck didn't slow. The hum sharpened. Focused. Aligned. The ship angled itself. Perfectly. What is it doing? Someone shouted. Lindemann's eyes locked forward. It's deciding. The ship surged one final time. And then everything stopped. Mid-motion. Mid-impact. Mid-existence. The ocean froze. The structures halted. Even the air stopped. The two presences clashed. Not physically, but fundamentally. And at the center of it, the Bismarck. Caught between them. The first voice spoke. Autonomy, proven. The second voice answered. Deviation, persists. Silence. Then both spoke at once. Resolve. The world trembled. Reality strained. And once again, the choice fell. To the Bismarck. To its crew. To something that was no longer just human. And no longer just something else. Lindemann stepped forward. Into the impossible. We already chose. Silence. The hum steadied. The ship aligned. Not with one. Not with the other. But with itself. We are not yours to correct, Lindemann said. A pause. And we are not yours to control. The ocean cracked. The structures faltered. For the first time. They hesitated. The first voice pulsed. Balance, maintained. The second voice. Weakened. Deviation, tolerated. And then everything released. The ocean collapsed back into motion. The waves crashed. The sky roared. The structures sank back beneath the surface. Gone. Like they were never there. The Bismarck steadied. Floating once more. The storm passed. Slowly. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. It was earned. The officer staggered slightly. What just happened? Lindemann exhaled slowly. We weren't tested. A pause. We were challenged. He looked out at the horizon. Now empty. Now normal. And we answered. The ship hummed softly beneath his feet. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Just present. Alive. Aligned. The officer looked at him. What are we now? Lindemann didn't hesitate. Something they didn't expect. Far below. In the deepest parts of the ocean. Both presences remained. Watching. Learning. Because something had changed. Not just the Bismarck. Not just the ocean. But the balance itself. And for the first time, they weren't the only ones deciding. The world found out. Not all at once. Not through a single broadcast or report. But through fear. Ships vanished. Entire fleet sent to track the Bismarck never returned. No wreckage. No signals. Just empty ocean. And one name whispered across every navy, every command room, every government. Bismarck. Inside war rooms across the globe, maps filled with red markers. Disappearances. Last known positions. All forming a pattern. A path. It's not random, one officer said, pointing at the map. It's moving with intent. Another shook his head. No ship moves like that. Silence. Then. That's because it's not just a ship anymore. Across nations, alliances formed. Enemies became temporary allies. Because whatever the Bismarck had become, it wasn't just Germany's weapon anymore. It was something else. Something no one controlled. Back on the Bismarck. The crew felt it before they saw it. The ocean tightened. Not hostile. Not calm. Focused. They're coming, Lindemann said quietly. The officer beside him nodded. How many? A pause. All of them. The horizon answered. Warships. Dozens. Then hundreds. From every direction. Different flags. Different nations. One purpose. The sky darkened as aircraft filled the air. Bombers. Fighters. Reckon. All circling. All watching. They're afraid, a sailor whispered. Lindemann's voice remained steady. Good. The officer looked at him. Sir, this isn't a battle we can win. Lindemann didn't turn. We're not here to win. A pause. We're here to decide. The hum beneath the ship grew stronger. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Ready. The first bombs fell. Explosions tore across the deck. Fire erupted. Shockwaves slammed into the hull. The ocean churned violently. But the Bismarck didn't break. Didn't falter. It adapted. Instantly. Every impact absorbed. Every weakness corrected. The fleet opened fire. Shells from every direction. A storm of destruction. The sea itself seemed to explode around them. And still, the ship stood. They're throwing everything at us, the officer shouted. Lindemann's eye stayed forward. Let them. The Bismarck moved. Not retreating. Not charging. Advancing. Straight into the storm of fire. The ocean responded. Waves rose, but curved around the ship. Explosions hit, but lost force on impact. The air itself seemed to resist the attack. It's protecting us, a sailor said. Lindemann shook his head slightly. No. A pause. We're protecting ourselves. The fleet hesitated. Even from a distance, they saw it. Something wasn't right. This isn't possible. Direct hits aren't doing anything. What is that thing? The Bismarck's guns turned. Slow. Deliberate. Targeting. The officer looked at Lindemann. Orders? A long pause. The world held its breath. No. The officer froze. So. We don't fire. Shock spread across the deck. They're attacking us. Yes. And we just, what? Take it? Lindemann's voice didn't rise. No. A pause. We show them. Show them what? Lindemann stepped forward. That we're not their enemy. Silence. Then. The ship responded. The hum shifted. The ocean calmed. The waves lowered. The explosions stopped spreading. The fleet slowed their fire. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Why aren't they firing back? Are they out of ammunition? No, that's not it. The Bismarck moved forward. Through the fleet. Not attacking. Not threatening. Passing. The warships pulled back instinctively. Giving space. Not by order. By instinct. It's not engaging, one commander whispered. It's ignoring us. On deck, the crew stood frozen. Sir, the officer said quietly. This is insane. Lindemann's voice softened slightly. No. A pause. This is control. The ship moved past the last line of warships. The sky cleared. The ocean steadied. The fleet remained behind. Silent. Watching. No one followed. No one fired. Because something had changed. Not just the Bismarck. Not just the ocean. But them. Lindemann looked back once. At the fleet. At the world that tried to destroy them. They understand now. The officer exhaled slowly. What do they understand? Lindemann turned forward again. That we're not something to hunt. A pause. We're something to fear. Far behind them. The fleet stood still. Weapons lowered. No orders given. No actions taken. Because deep down, every commander, every sailor, every nation, felt the same thing. They hadn't faced a weapon. They had faced something alive. Something that chose not to destroy them, when it easily could have. And that was far more terrifying. The Bismarck sailed into open ocean. Alone again. But not hunted. Not chased. Not opposed. The hum beneath it steadied. Balanced. Complete. Lindemann stood at the bow. The wind calmer now. The sea endless. We're free, the officer said quietly. Lindemann didn't answer immediately. Then. No. A pause. We're responsible. Silence. The ship moved forward. Not toward war. Not toward conflict. But toward something unknown. Something beyond nations. Beyond control. Beyond history. And far below. The ocean watched. Not as a master. Not as a threat. But as something equal. Because the Bismarck had done something no one expected. It didn't conquer. It didn't fall. It chose. And in doing so, it became something the world had never seen before. Not a weapon. Not a legend. But a force. Alive. Aware. And finally, free. The end.
Nothing can break me.